Should you or should you not move out under the age of 18? This conversation requires some coffee. Welcome back to my channel, inspiring you guys to be fearless every single day of the week. I realized last week that there was so much crap in the video, so I'm trying to keep it really organized and clean so it doesn't look like I live in a bunch of clutter. Before I get into this video, a new episode of my podcast, The New Unfiltered, airs this week on August 2nd. Whatever day this Wednesday is, The New Unfiltered comes back. I decided to do a solo episode to keep everybody in the loop. I haven't posted an episode of this podcast in quite some time, and so I thought I would start fresh from the beginning on what has gone on since my 183rd episode aired. I moved out at 17. There's a whole story behind why and how I moved out and some of the questions that I'm frequently getting asked about why and how I moved out. So there's a lot of answers to go through here. Now, I know that moving out in this day and age is so hard. People are actually moving back in with their families in their late 20s, early 30s. It is so much harder now to move out than it was when I moved out. I think I moved out in 2015 or 2016. I was barely 17. And so there's no direct forward answer, but through this video, hopefully you'll be able to make your own conclusion of whether or not you're ready to do this kind of thing, because I remember I was struggling so much, not only in school, but also being stuck in a small town and wanting to escape. And if you're like me and you know that you want to do something different with your life, you don't necessarily want to stay in a small town and go to the college all of the kids in your class are going to go to, then you probably need to start thinking about this kind of a decision. I kind of knew that my life was going to be really different and that I wasn't going to go to college. So if you're college bound, you should move out, go live in a dorm, go get an on-campus apartment and figure out your life from there. If you're not sure whether you want to go to college or you know you want to skip to the career side, the internship, whatever it is, then this video is for you. Getting myself invited to Fashion Week every single season, February and September. This is when Fashion Week was still at Lincoln Center, before the days of influencers, if you can believe it. And I'm going to Fashion Week and I meet a girl, can't even remember what her name was. I end up becoming friends with her, Talia, I think her name was. Of course I'm lying about my age, because what other thing would I do trying to make it in New York and not having any money or really knowing anyone at this point? I can't tell people that on top of the fact I have no money and barely any connections. I'm sitting front row at Fashion Week and I'm underage. Like, that would not be good. So I'm telling everyone I'm like 18, 19, 20. She ends up being like, do you want to sublet my apartment? I had to Google what even is a sublet. She was like, I'm moving out, I need someone to move in. And I was like, you know, what does it cost? And she was like, $800 a month, but you can pay us at the end of the month. I just really need someone to take over this lease, because her mom was paying for the apartment and her mom, I think, was getting really sick of the fact that New York was not happening for her, but she didn't want to be losing money on this apartment. I think it's winter. Yeah, it's winter. It's terribly cold outside. It's maybe February or March. I'm not really making that much money right now from my website. I'm probably making like a few $100s a month. I've got maybe a few $100s in savings, everything under $500. I'm still thinking about going to college because I'm thinking that's what I'm supposed to do, right? That's what people my age do, right? So I'm really college focused. And then my mom broke it to me that she couldn't pay for me to go to college. Simultaneously, I'm failing out of high school. So there's really no opportunity here for me to go to college. But what I know that I love is writing. I love the website. I'm making a lot of friends through the website because I didn't have many friends. And so I tell my parents and I just say to them, I remember I was at dinner and I say to them, I'm moving to New York for a month. And I'm such a little schemer. I knew that they would be like, are you out of your mind? So I was like, I'm just gonna go for the month, let me go for the month. But I didn't really have to convince my parents. I love my parents, but they aren't, number one, the kind of parents that would really stop me from doing anything. I think that they were really caught up in their own lives, rightfully so. And also I'm kind of just over in the corner. I'm like flailing around. I can't seem to get any good grades in school. I'm making some money from this website. I'm going to Fashion Week, sitting front row. I think my parents at this point are just like, who is this child? She is going to become something, or is she just going to totally fail? So I tell this to them, but I also didn't really give them an opportunity for them to say no. So huge note on this, in this part. If you have parents that are not like mine, that are really on you for school, you're gonna have to have a totally different strategy than I had. I went into this knowing that there was no way my parents could stop me because they weren't paying me to stay home and they weren't gonna pay for me to go to school. So I knew that it was gonna be up to me to make or break this situation. If I had had parents that were really on me about grades and school, I would have probably made a PowerPoint. I am and was a huge fan of PowerPoints back in the day. I think you should always make a PowerPoint to prove something to someone or present something to someone. And I did that a few times with my mom throughout middle and high school to get her to agree to things like going to Fashion Week or going to London for Fashion Week or getting sponsored. And that always really worked. So take a different tactic if you don't have parents like mine. Literally within 24 hours, I pack up my entire childhood bedroom. I have about 6 different suitcases. My dad drives me to the train in New Haven, Connecticut, which is about an hour and a half from where I'm from. I'm on the train. This is really barely before TikTok wasn't around. Instagram, I think, was around. Facebook was around. But it's not like I'm out here tweeting, hey, I'm moving to New York. Does anyone want to be friends? I remember I get off the train at Grand Central. I'm flailing around. I've got 9 suitcases, barely any money in my bank account. I think to myself, how do I even, where even is Brooklyn? I have the address, which is actually a tattoo behind my ear now, 360 Franklin Avenue. Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, right off the C train. But I'm thinking I can't get on a subway with all of these suitcases. So I get in a cab, and of course, I get out of the cab, and the cab is like $70 from Grand Central to Brooklyn. And I just remember thinking in that moment, oh my gosh, what am I doing? How am I gonna do this? I'm not gonna be able to live here. I walk into this apartment. She had vacated. So essentially it's a 5-bedroom walk up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. It's snowing. It is freezing outside. A guy answers the door. I knock on, I think it was apartment 3F. I knock on the door. This really handsome guy opens the door. He ends up being kind of nuts. And he's like, welcome, what up? Welcome to the apartment. And I'm like, all right, hey, what's up? He doesn't ask my age, anything. And he leads me to one of 5 bedrooms in this actually really pretty apartment. It wasn't nice or new, but it was all exposed brick, and that's super nice. It's a very New York thing. My window is a view of a wall. I'm basically in a tiny mini jail cell. So it's like a probably 300 square foot, maybe less, room. And then one window facing a concrete wall. It's snowing, so it's basically black in there, and an air mattress. So I set up shop. And in the next 30 days, I end up going to a coffee shop and just blogging away. I was so determined to make this work. I was so determined to just make anything work, to make any kind of money. I'm living off of bananas and oats and peanut butter. I'm just super broke, and it was really hard, and I had no way to make friends. I always heard my roommates having sex. At this point, I've never even been intimate with a guy, so I was kind of like, oh my gosh, and I didn't really pay attention in high school to health class. I mean, who does? So I'm learning a lot in this experience. Anyway, so to make that first month's rent, I go to a Sally Beauty Supply store one day, and I had seen some other influencer have a Instagram takeover. Essentially what you would do is you would take over a brand's account for the day. So I take photos on my phone of all of these brands, and I email them. I go back to the coffee shop. My apartment doesn't even have Wi-Fi, so I'm living off of my personal hotspot. I go back to the coffee shop and I write emails to all of these brands. Hey, I'm Alexa Curtis. I've done some TV segments at this point. I go to Fashion Week. I'm an influencer, or whatever I called myself in the day, because that term wasn't a thing, blogger. And I said, I would love to do an Instagram takeover for the brand for $1,500. No. I get days and days and days of no. One day I wake up to a hair care brand, and they're like, this is great. How do we facilitate payment? Things like all of a sudden stars are going off in my head. I'm like, oh my gosh, it only took me 2 weeks to make $1,500. I can't believe it. Of course, now I'm like, okay, if I do this and I do it well, that means that there's actually potential here. I may make more than a few $100s a month off of my blog. And it kind of rolled from there. So it was months of this. It was months of hustling. I did a lot of TV segments. I was just super broke. I was still meeting people at some of these events. I ended up getting myself some writing gigs with Guest of a Guest, and just constantly going out and networking as often as I could. And then I never went back to Mansfield. I stayed in Brooklyn for I think about 3 months, and it was not safe. If you've been to Bed-Stuy now, it's super gentrified and cool. Back in this year, it was not safe. I was just not in a good position living there. So I went on a Facebook group called Gypsy Housing, and this is a whole other story for another video, but I met a girl and she let me move in. It was in Financial District. It became a disaster because she figured out my real age and I had to legally sign this contract. But at this point I was paying $1,500 for rent, and I was living in her actual closet, and kept working my way up from there, and then New York to Boston, and I never went back to Mansfield. And I learned so much from that period of time in New York about how to get into debt. I started taking out credit cards and got into a lot of debt from that, but that was how I was experimenting and living life, was off of those airline credit cards, which now I know are terrible investments. And I learned a lot about how to deal with people. I remember learning a lot about how to deal with that kind of a roommate. I learned a lot about how to just navigate around New York City. I mean, I was living super far out in Brooklyn and I always wanted to be in Manhattan. So I learned that, and I learned how to just struggle. I think that there's something really special if you are someone who wants to move out and you have that passion inside of you. You just have to be prepared that it's going to be really hard. It doesn't necessarily get easier, but what gets better is that you get stronger because you just experience more. So if you are watching this video and you do want to move out and you're under the age of 20, you have to know it inside yourself that you are ready to just push. Like, you will just not be able to give up until you get to a point where you can relax a little bit. So if you've got that mentality, and your parents or your family, whatever, will always let you come back home. I knew that I always had a spot that my parents would obviously always let me go back home. And so for me, it wasn't like I was stuck in New York, but I was so determined to escape this small town and make it happen. And I did. So if you're like me and you've got that bug and you just want to go explore, then go it. Live your life, and you can always go back and live with your family. You can always find a cheaper apartment. You can always go live in a hostel, whatever it is. If you have the fire inside of you that a lot of people don't, because a lot of people don't want to take that kind of a risk, then I promise you, you will make it. This Fearless Friday, I'm trying acupuncture, so I'll be putting up a video about that. I'm pretty nervous because I really hate needles, so wish me luck. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, make sure you subscribe and like this video so that you get a notification every single time a new video comes out. Head to the bio of this video as well to see how to subscribe to my weekly newsletter on entrepreneurship, as well as subscribe to the New Unfiltered podcast so you get a notification when new episodes come out. I've got so many amazing guests coming up that I'm so excited for you to hear their stories about trials and tribulations of being a founder. And I'll see you guys back this week for a video on Fearless Friday.